Good morning, everybody. Before we actually start the agenda, I'd just like to welcome everybody to today's meeting. So thank you for taking the time to come to today's meeting, because hopefully you'll get a chance to all have something to say, which is always most welcome. Introductions will be done later before the actual items begin, but firstly we'll just cover a little bit of housekeeping. The fire alarm. A fire practice is not expected today. Is that right, Christine? Good. If the alarm sounds, if it does sound, can all present leave the building as quickly as possible by way of the nearest exit, which is over there. The designated assembly point is in the public square in front of CAST, beyond the fountain, which is away from the civic office. If there is anybody with mobility issues, please wait in the refuge area at the top of the stairs where the emergency evacuation lift is located, and use the intercom situated to the left-hand side of the lift doors to call for assistance. No roll call will be undertaken. Thank you. Mobile phones, can I just ask everyone to ensure your mobile phone is switched to silent mode, please, if you've not already done so. Thank you very much. This meeting will be audio-visually recorded and will be available to view on the Council's website and the YouTube channel. Can I ask all those present to use their microphones to ensure the audio can be captured, please? Any members of the public entering the Council chamber are accepting that their images will be retained and broadcast by the Council. I note there are a couple of members of the public in attendance. If any member of the public or press is intending to record or film any part of today's meeting, please ensure that this does not disturb the actual conduct of the meeting. Right, agenda items. Item 1, apologies for absence. So far, we have apologies from Councillor Gemma Cobby, Councillor Steve Cox, Councillor John Reid, and co-optee Antoinette Drinkle. Are there any other apologies or absence, please? Thank you. Item 2, to consider the extent, if any, to which the public and press are to be excluded from the meeting. There are no issues on the agenda. Item 3, declarations of interest, if any. If you have an interest, please declare this, and a form will need to be completed following the meeting. Please contact Caroline Martin, who can assist you with the process. Is there anybody got any declarations of interest, please? Thank you. I'm aware that even though there are members of the public present, there's nobody wishing to make a public statement, so we'll move forward. That's it. Right, item 5. We're just going to cover some minutes from previous meetings. Item 5, minutes from the meeting of the Ovian Scrutiny Management Committee held on the 3rd of November 2025, 21st of November 2025, and the 11th of December 2025. And those are pages 1 to 30. Can the members of the committee agree that those minutes are accurate, a true and accurate record? Thank you. And seconded? Thank you, Frank and Maria. Right, before I introduce the first item, because many of the members of OSMC only came on the council in May, and I only became chair of the committee in October, I just want to read the chair's statement, because it is such an important issue, the budget. I just want to, and it'll encompass everything that we've gone through till we got to this point. So thank you, members. This committee's role today is to provide robust, constructive and evidence-based scrutiny of the Mayor's of the corporate plan and the Mayor's draft budget proposals, in line with the Council's budget and policy framework, the Council's constitution, and recognised national best practice for overview and scrutiny. Overview and scrutiny is not here to produce an alternative budget, nor to undertake line-by-line rewriting of proposals. Equally, our role is not to endorse, support or oppose the Mayor's budget. Our responsibility is to test the assumptions on which the budget is built, examine the realism and deliverability of proposed savings, assess financial and service risk, and ensure that the voices and needs of Doncaster's residents have been properly considered within the proposals. We will therefore focus our questions on strategic alignment, evidence, deliverability, financial resilience and risk management, particularly where those issues have previously been identified through OSMC's performance and finance monitoring work. Members should note that OSMC held a structured question planning session on Monday the 2nd of February 2026 to prepare question packs for today's meeting based on the documentation available to the committee at that time. Since that date, additional key documents have been released, including the Mayor's budget proposal, the corporate plan, the housing revenue account strategy, the capital strategy and capital budget, the treasury management strategy and the revenue budget, released across the 3rd and 4th of February. Due to the timing of their release, the committee has not had the opportunity to fully review and incorporate these documents into today's structured questioning process. I have raised concerns regarding compressed scrutiny timelines through governance channels, and I welcome the acknowledgement of those concerns. I have been advised that, should it be necessary, I have the option to adjourn today's meeting after the scheduled session and reconvene a further OSMC meeting in order to ensure that all relevant documents receive appropriate scrutiny. Members will also be aware that the Constitution sets an expectation that Ovian scrutiny is afforded appropriate time to consider budget proposals once formally submitted. Whilst we recognise the pressures created by the timing of the final local government finance settlement and the need to maintain the Council's statutory budget timetable, including Cabinet consideration on the 11th of February and full Council on the 26th of February, it is important that scrutiny is meaningful, evidence-based and not purely procedural. Effective scrutiny requires sufficient time to properly test evidence, and it is my responsibility as Chair to ensure this committee can discharge that duty properly. This committee will therefore be firm, fair and proportionate in its challenge, and its conclusions will be reported transparently to the Mayor ahead of full Council. Our focus today remains ensuring that the budget is deliverable, financially resilient and aligned to the needs and priorities of Doncaster's residents. Thank you for that, for listening to me for that. That just sets out the framework of how we're going to move forward. Right, so item 6, Corporate Plan 2026-2027. Members, we will now move to the Draft Corporate Plan 26-27. And as members are aware, the committee's role is to review and comment on the corporate plan and to make recommendations to Cabinet and Council where appropriate. Ovian scrutiny does not approve or endorse policy documents. Our role is to provide constructive challenge, identify risks, test assumptions and highlight areas for further consideration. Members should also note that this review is taking place ahead of publication of the government's final local government finance settlement, and therefore financial assumptions may be subject to confirmation. Can officers for this item and members of the panel introduce themselves, please? I don't know if you want to start from Debbie. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Debbie Hogg, and I'm the Corporate Director for the Executive Director for Corporate Resources.
Good morning. My name is Faye Tyers. I'm the Service Director for Finance and Technology and the Council's Statutory Section 151 Officer.
Morning, I'm Phil Holmes. I'm the Executive Director for Adults, Wellbeing and Culture.
Morning, I'm Rachel Leslie. I'm Director of Public Health.
Good morning, I'm Rebecca Wall. I'm the Service Director for Children's Social Care, here on behalf of Rihanna Nelson, the Executive Director for Children's Services.
Morning everyone, Lee Tillman, Exec Director, Policy Partnerships and Investment.
Morning everyone, my name is Alan Wiltshire. I'm Service Director for Policy, Economic Development and Environmental Sustainability.
Morning, Scott Cardwell, Service Director for Development and Traders Services. I'm covering for Dan Swain, the Exec Director of Place.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. What we'll do is we'll ask for questions from the OSMC first, and then if any other members have any questions, we'll certainly try and find time for those as well. So we'll now move on to the questions. The first one is... Oh, yeah, please, if that's all right. Oh, yeah, sorry. I'd like to hand over to Alan to introduce the item. Thank you, Alan. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, introducing the corporate plan, draft corporate plan for 26-27. That sets out how we deliver against the city borough strategy and maintains a clear golden thread between our priorities, our budget, and the outcomes we collectively want to achieve for people in Doncaster. This follows from the approval of the City Borough Strategy at the Council last month and maintains the same frame of that with the Big Four collaborations and the 8 priorities. The corporate plan, though, sets in context the Council's contribution to this in 26-27 alongside the budget, and it sets out some of the key deliverables, key service delivery areas, and the service standards or performance measures for each of our priorities. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to make any comments before we start, before we move on to questions? So I'll reverse back now and go on to the questions. OSMC will ask them first, and if any other members have any questions, we'll try and find time for that at all. So the first question is on strategic alignment. Given that the council has finite resources, what is the effective prioritisation underpinning the budget? What do we prioritise first, and why do we do that?
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to answer this if that's okay. So we've got a well-trodden process that we go through each year as we produce the corporate plan, which involves each of the directorate leadership teams looking at the priorities that are set for Doncaster, as Alan said, through the City Borough Strategy, and then making an assessment of what would be prioritised for the year that the council will contribute to that. So each directorate leadership team goes through that process, identifies the priorities that they want to elevate and focus on for the next year. They're then included in the corporate plan, and again, as Alan said, that process is aligned with the budget setting process to make sure that in the totality of resources that we have as a council, the things that we put in the corporate plan, we have the resources to achieve. Now, obviously, things do change, circumstances change over the year, and obviously we've got a volatile environment that we're operating in as a council, both nationally and internationally. So those things might change through the year. There might be things that we need to prioritise more. There might be new requirements on us. There might be circumstances that change during the year. So our performance management framework allows us to change that. And obviously we would reflect that those updates and any changes within the quarterly performance and finance report that obviously is published and brought to scrutiny for assessment. So it's obviously quite a dynamic situation. So that's really how we operate. And in terms of how that's then translated through the organisation, each part of the council then produces a service plan which summarises its own contribution to what the council is trying to achieve in the corporate plan. And then that's then aligned to individual performance appraisals that everyone has across the organisation to show how their individual objectives is contributing to what the team is doing, the directorate is doing, and therefore the council.
And as a supplementary, would it be right in thinking that probably the individual service directors think their priorities should be number one? Do you know what I mean? I think everyone would think like that, wouldn't they? They'd like it to be top of the list. Who has the final say in who actually prioritises them in a certain order that then allows delivering those outcomes? Because somebody's got to make that decision on how that list sits, surely, because you might not be able to achieve everything unless you organised it. Who organises that priority list, please?
So I think probably fair to say that we don't sort of have a pecking order, if that makes sense, in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because the things that we have to do as an organisation like ours and the complexity and breadth of it, we've got everything from children's social care, adult social care, planning, roads maintenance. So we've obviously got such a breadth of activity to say one thing is more important than the other is very, very difficult to do. But that said, what we then have to do in the context of each directorate and each portfolio of services is think about what are the key deliverables and the key areas of focus in a year within their existing resources that we have. Because as we know and has happened in the last 12 months, new things are given to us to do, or new funding streams are launched that we then have to respond to, new requirements are launched that we have to respond to, and the environment around us is changing. So we have to kind of keep that dynamic and ongoing process. But what we put in the corporate plan are and the service standards and the measures by which we judge success are within the resource envelope that we have. And of course, we would all like to have more resources to be able to deliver on the challenges and the pressures that we've got and the expectations that are on us, but we try and balance the priorities in the corporate plan with the available resources that we have at our disposal.
I think Lee's described it really well. But just to, we're an experienced leadership team, and we haven't got a sense of trying to selfishly get more resources for ourselves. So, for example, if there isn't sufficient investment in Doncaster's place, in Doncaster's infrastructure around, say, roads, around people being able to get out and about in terms of green spaces, then Doncaster people will be less happy. Older people, disabled people will be able to get out and about less, and adult social care, which is part of my responsibility, will suffer. So none of us have an interest in being selfish. We've all got an interest in looking at Doncaster as a whole, and then we work as a leadership team to manage priorities within that in the way Lee's described. And if we argue, we have a boss. So that sorts that out.
I was going to build on that type of theme because it's an art, not a science. We understand the framework we're operating in. We understand all those complexities we've talked about in terms of all the legislative requirements we've got to deliver on. And largely, so it's not just about academic words. So the plan might be considered as it's just a plan, but it needs quantification, and that's articulated through the other part that we'll be talking about later in the agenda. And then it's about synthesising all of that together, because it might be that something's a priority, but it's a low level of resource, or it's a key priority, but it's got more resources. So it's just about understanding the totality and about synthesising that. And as Phil says, there is some rub. There's got to be some rub, because inevitably we are living within a challenging financial environment, and therefore we do need to think about these carefully. And we take soundings from a lot of stakeholders as part of that as well. So Lee talked about public engagement, and Phil's just talked about the people who are accessing service delivery, but you also shape it. So it is a very complex, and it is a bit like that piece of grit in the oyster that you actually hopefully get a pearl, and that's what is the manifestation in terms of service delivery. It's a formulation of all those things coming together.
Thank you. Next question will be Maria. Oh, sorry, Jane.
As things change throughout the year, and you say the funding streams sometimes come in, what sort of leeway do you have for moving the budget around to as things change throughout the year?
Sorry, okay, Chair, answering that. So in terms of new resources, they come in many guises, and sometimes they're quite prescriptive, and sometimes they've got more flexibility. And we will present those through, if they're of a key decision, we will report on those specifically, because under the Council's constitution, the FPRs, we'll need to report to those charged with governance about those resources and to receive that funding. So that will be netted off in that particular way. If it's something under other thresholds, then it might be that we can deal with it as officers through the Council constitution and decision-making processes. If it's around a formulation of new policy, and that's something it's expected to be delivered within the existing resources, then it will be for the executive director under the scheme of delegation, the framework that they have, to consider that the resources that are available to us. The first thing that we, from a resource management point of view, would be about, can you do this within the existing resources if it's not external funding coming in? And the environment, that ability to move within the budget that's allocated within each exec director's portfolio, they would need to live with that. And then through the quarterly performance report, we're reporting on that through the financial monitoring, and we're also usually signalling that change through the narrative. So if there was something emerging that we didn't have extra resources from and we needed to do it, then we would probably be talking about it in the accompanying narrative that would go to Cabinet for because they're charged with governance and then also overview and scrutiny. I would hope that if there was something emerging, there was a key national priority or something, that each individual overview and scrutiny management committee, you know, those ones that have got responsibility particularly for that particular area, they would have also been ahead of the game, because the relevant exec director would be having those conversations within, if it was regen or with it housing or whatever area. So that is really the conduit, you know, that portfolio engagement and that scrutiny engagement. So there's a lot of people with eyes on. I'm hoping you're all sort of doing the horizon scanning as well, as you know, as part of your briefs. So that would be the mechanism where things would come in and get reported on. There's very few times where if it's a key priority that you're going to be caught unawares. So there's lots of baby steps and ways of finding out about things. Hopefully that's what you're looking for.
Can you just tell everyone what FPRs are, please?
Financial procedure rules.
Thank you. Maria, when you come to ask after you've asked the question, if you want to ask a supplementary, please pop your finger up for me so I can allow you to do that. Is that all right? And if people can do that, if members can do that before you go on to the second question, because obviously I need to keep an eye on time and things like that. Thanks, Maria. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. What elements of this plan will be scaled back first if the final settlement is worse than what we assume?
Hi. So I think Lee, Phil and Debbie have done a pretty good job of answering this question already, in terms of if something happens, whether that's a change, whether that's a policy change, there is processes in place to look at that, address that, and Debbie's just described that quite eloquently in terms of what would happen. The only thing I'd probably add to the whole conversation we've just had as part of the previous question is there's also something we have as part of our service standards, our performance measures, is we have target setting, and that needs to be linked to the resources that we have and making sure that that's appropriate. Setting inappropriate targets or stretching targets without the resources doesn't do anyone any favours. So the only thing I would add to the previous answers is that where we have that situation, good target setting linked to resources is really important. And if that does change, then the targets or an assessment of the services needs to do the same. So that's the only addition I would add to that previous question, which I think dealt with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I just come in as well in terms of the final settlement and what changes we might expect. So, Councillor Hollingworth, the final settlement is not expected to go down compared to the provisional settlement. It's mainly a check, really, in terms of that the calculations were correct. There may be some changes because they have been muted in terms of whether they change the population, numbers in the formula. So there may be some changes, but it's not. It shouldn't be significant. They're also looking at whether there's been a lot of lobbying in terms of whether there's some further funding that might be included in the final settlement as well. So there's always, I think, as it answered in terms of that first question, there's always going to be changes, but I think in terms of the final settlement, it shouldn't be an initial steer.
Thank you. I'll ask question 3. Reopening the airport is the #1 priority. What are the financial and service consequences if spring 2026 is not achieved, please?
I'll pick that up, if that's okay. The spring 26, I think we've updated that, and what's set out in the corporate plan talks about our airspace. So the target for what we're achieving this year is largely about the mobilising Fly Doncaster, the necessary underpinning arrangements that support that, the appointment of key personnel to take that leadership team forward, and engaging with the necessary arrangements as part of the airspace. We're progressing with conversations about commercial flights. and so that's our target. I think that's sort of set out within the report. So that's a part of that. We've updated the financial plan. That financial plan was the subject of the report that went through the scrutiny process in November, and that financial plan also underpinned the report that went to full council in relation to the borrowing. So all of those prerequisites have been considered and formulated as part of that, but that's largely that 26. Well, I've just given you an outline of what we anticipate happening in 26.
Thank you. Councillor Booth.
Deliverability. The plan contains delivery commitments across all 6 Doncaster priorities. Which 3 carry the greatest risk of under-delivery within the current budget envelope?
Okay, so it's really tricky to identify just the 3, and the first thing I'd say is probably that a lot of actions and activity we have here are interrelated. So delivery of one affects the other and may affect several within the plan. So that's the first thing to say, that a lot of our activity and delivery milestones we've set in the corporate plan are related to each other. The other thing is that you, as we said previously, you receive monitoring on a regular basis, so you'll be aware of pressures and performance issues that we've got this year. So you understand where we are in terms of our current situation. So a corporate plan doesn't just start from zero. We are continuing some of that activity into the new year. So having that kind of idea and regular monitoring about our current situation is really important as part of this. We've also include as part of our report some of the strategic risks that's reported alongside the quarterly performance and finance monitoring here at OSMC and also at Audit Committee as well. So we make sure that all of that is packaged together as part of reporting and making sure that we can do that. We've set a corporate plan that is hopeful, challenging, but achievable. That's what we do each year. And we need to make sure that it's aligned to our resources, which is said at the start. And it's something we've got a really good chance to achieve as we go into 26-27.
Anything else? Right, thank you. Question 5, workforce capacity. How has workforce capacity been factored into the deliverability of savings and transformation, and how will it be communicated to staff, please?
Thanks, Chair. I'll answer this one. I suppose the first thing to say, which is, I guess, an obvious point, is that our staff are our greatest asset and absolutely fundamental to everything that we try and achieve for Doncaster. And we have put a lot of investment and time over recent years in making sure we've got good engagement and good feedback from our staff. We've got staff surveys, which we do annually, which show really good intent to stay. I think 85-86% of our staff say they will be still with us in 12 months' time. So keeping that engagement, keeping that motivation and keeping that commitment is absolutely fundamental to everything we do. In terms of some of the specifics around how the capacity is factored in, we always consider that when we're developing the plans and the strategies that we put in place for any changes in the organisation. So what do we need from a staffing point of view is fundamental. And we regularly review that because obviously things change, and we've talked in the previous answers about new requirements that come on us, new legislation, new policy direction from government. So we're obviously always trying to keep this under review and try and keep this appropriate. And that capacity has a number of different forms. There's new skills that we need to build for staff, the experience that we need, the sheer numbers and volume of support that we need for some of the work, which is obviously quite extensive and complex. So that's a constant factor and something that we constantly keep under review. And obviously we make sure, and you'll see through the budget proposals as we get into it, there's obviously areas where we've got pressures, where we need to bring and use the resources that we've got, either through grants from central government or local resources, to make sure we've got the capacity in certain areas. So just to give one example is some of the reform of children's social care through the Families First programme. That's a huge change. It's the biggest change in social care. Rebecca doesn't need me to say this, but the biggest change in social care in probably a generation. And that's requiring lots of resources and capacities to support that change, and some of that resource is coming directly from central government to help us. So that's a good example how we try to right size the resources and use the resources we've got to provide the capacity that we have. And we always try and highlight where we've got specialist skills or specialist capacity that needs to be brought in, because sometimes we don't necessarily have that capacity within the existing workforce, particularly for specialist things. We've talked about a number of things today where we've got specific requirements. So we try and highlight that and then use the resources to bring the right skills and capacity in on the right basis to help us. And the question, I think, around communication is absolutely fundamental as well, because there's a lot happening. There's a lot of expectation, I think, on the workforce. There's a lot of change. I've mentioned the Families First from a social care perspective, from children's, but there's lots of other changes that I'm sure we'll get into as well. And we have to try and appropriately pace the change that we implement across the council and make sure that we don't burn our staff out, and we make sure that they've got the appropriate capacity and support to make that change. And that's our job collectively to understand that, because we have some of our collective resources and capacity that works across the council. So we need to make sure that we constantly listen to and take account of how it's feeling for staff. One of the things that's come through really strongly in our staff survey is collaboration, and the teams want to collaborate more, our workforce wants to collaborate more, and there's very few things that we deliver as a council that is just one service area on its own can do. So that's increasingly something that we're conscious of as a leadership team, and want to keep helping to create the conditions for our teams to work together, to develop the skills, to develop the capacity, and you know, hopefully have fun and have a good time at work, because it's not much fun coming to work if you're not passionate and you're not enjoying yourself. So our job is to create the conditions for our staff to give the best and perform at their best.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you. That concludes the questions from the actual OSMC. Do any other members in the room wish to ask any questions on the corporate plan before I move on to recommendations? No, thank you. So what I'm doing is I'm minded now to propose that from the report recommendations, the committee is asked to first of all, note strategic context. The committee notes that the content of the draft corporate plan 2026-27 has been informed by the refresh of the City Borough strategy, Doncaster delivering together. That regarding view and comment, the committee confirms that it has reviewed and discussed the content of the draft corporate plan 2026-27 and has identified observations and recommendations to inform cabinet consideration. Regarding service standards, the committee notes the proposal to identify appropriate service standard targets following approval of the corporate plan and the council budget, and emphasises the importance of these being subject to performance monitoring and scrutiny oversight. And finally, the committee agrees to submit its observations and recommendations to inform cabinet consideration of the corporate plan on the 11th of February 2026 and full council on the 26th of February 2026. Are these recommendations from the report seconded by a member of the committee, please? Thank you, Maria. Does the committee agree with those recommendations? Thank you very much. I'll now move on to the committee's decision. Can I have a proposer to move the chair be authorised to agree and issue the response letter to the Mayor and Cabinet on behalf of the committee, please? Frank, thank you very much. Is that seconded? Thank you. Yes, I will indeed. Are there any other recommendations before we move on from the committee? Good. Are there any key points the committee would like to include in the letter that I will produce that were discussed at the meeting today? If nothing comes to mind now, can you please let me know and give me time to obviously put that in the letter? So I'll take anything from you over the next few days, if that's all right. Okay. That concludes this item on the agenda. We'll have a slight pause now if anybody wants to get a quick toilet break, and I know if anybody needs to leave, and then we'll move on to the budget aspect at item 7. So a couple of minutes, if that's all right. All right. Thank you. Right, back again. Item 7. Overview and scrutiny consideration of the Mayor's budget proposals 26-27 to 29-30. Members will now move to consideration of the Mayor's budget proposal 2026 to 29-30. The committee's role is to consider and respond to the draft proposal or to the proposals. It is not the role of overview and scrutiny to approve, endorse or oppose the budget, but to provide evidence-based scrutiny and identify risks, assumptions and deliverability issues. Members should note that this scrutiny is taking place prior to publication of the government's final local government final settlement. As such, the committee recognises that final settlement assumptions remain subject to confirmation. I'd like to hand over to Debbie and Faye to introduce the item, please.
I didn't know you were going to do that. Not a worry, not a worry. So what you've got in front of you is the multiple parts of the process. We've got the HRA, which sets out the rent setting for 20,000 properties, which St Ledger manage. You've got the capital programme that basically sets out the investment in our assets. It's set out over 4 years, but actually it's about investing for the future. It's investment in capital it's not for the day-to-day, it's long-term. We've got the Treasury Management Statement, and this is about how we manage the day-to-day cash as well as borrowing, and the approach that we take within the council. The revenue budget then brings that all together in terms of the proposals and links in with the discussion we've just been having about resourcing those key priorities of the organisation. What you've got in front of you is there is additional resources that we've received as part of the revenue settlement, but it's still not enough. And you will hear, I think, through the conversation that different to the past where we've managed savings in order to shrink the budget, shrink the expenditure to live within resources. The challenge that the organisation has is about now living within means as we get further pressures, particularly in relation to children and adults waste, homelessness, these statutory activities. So that is the challenge for the organisation to manage those pressures. So I think that's probably a roundup of what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Faye, did you want to add anything? No? Never mind. Right, what we'll do then is, once again, questions will come from OSMC first. And then when we've finished our pre-prepared questions, which you know you've had sight, and so they are on notice, then what I'll do is I'll put questions out to anyone else. And then what I'll do is I'll refer back to my opening statement about what we're going to do next. Is that all right? Thank you very much. So, Councillor Kidd, question 1.
Thank you. Please, can you tell me something about the assumptions that have been made within the budget, which may produce the greatest financial risk if they do not materialise as planned, and how those assumptions are made? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kidd. I'm going to start this one, and then if others want to chip in really in terms of the greatest financial risks. So considering the greatest financial risks, thought about likelihood and the impact in terms of on the actual budget itself. I'd also like to reference the Section 151 assurance statement and the risk assessment on reserves. So when looking at what is the biggest impact, as it's stated in the budget, the 70% of council spend is on adults and children's and public health. Also, we've included from the SIPFA Financial Resilience Index that based on that calculation, the social care ratio, Doncaster's social care ratio is just under 80% compared to similar authorities, which is 78%. So both these calculations just demonstrate the amount of money that is spent really in terms of adults and children. So thereby, I think the biggest financial risk in terms of the assumptions are related to adult social care, children's social care, and the third one I'll just talk a little bit about. Although it's not directly in terms of the revenue budget, when we've talked about the different types of funding, is the dedicated schools grant and the high needs block. They're the three greatest risks really in terms of this budget. So what we have done in terms of adult social care, we've worked really closely with Phil and his management team in terms of what are the assumptions, particularly looking at those high cost areas, residential care, home care, supported living. And what we've done is we've included the details on the assumptions in the budget. So it's based on the demand, the current demand as at when we're pulling together the proposals. Then we've done projections to the year end, and then what's the projections for 26, 27, 27, 28 onwards, working, like I said, with Phil and the team in terms of those assumptions. So we have looked at supporting 1,775 older people in residential placements, for example. We've looked at what's needed for short term and for supported living, and those assumptions included in the budget. But that's I suppose one of the greatest financial risk in terms of the assumptions. And we've seen that we've had lots of discussions as part of OSMC in terms of the monitoring, and we've seen the impact on 25-26 as well in terms of those pressures, the volatility in terms of those areas. So adult social care. The other one is children's social care pressures, and again we've been working really closely with Rihanna and Rebecca and the management team in terms of what those assumptions are and what we need to include in the budget. So we've been looking at that care ladder in terms of what are the likelihood, what are the estimated placement numbers, how many out of authority, what's the the assumptions in terms of number of foster placements, and building that together, and then those assumptions feed into the budget. But again, they're high cost, so one out of authority placement can have a big impact on that on the budget, on the monitoring, as we've discussed previously. Also, Lee referenced the transformation as well. So there is money in the budget for transformation, but there's also savings in there as well moving forward. So that transformation process as well. And as I said, the last one is the dedicated schools grant, the high needs block. It's a significant risk due to the amount. The report includes the projected DSG deficit of just under 57 million for 25-26, potentially increasing to 118 million. So, like I say, although that's a ring-fence grant, we know the override is in place until March 28. We're waiting for some further information, which we expect to receive in the final settlement in terms of what the proposals are for that deficit, and about the white paper on the reforms as well, because it's not just the cumulative deficit, it's that in-year deficit as well. Currently, detailed in the report as 19 million. So it's not just historic; it's that ongoing future position as well. I think that was Were there others?
Yeah, so I don't feel offended that Faye suggested adult social care is one of the biggest risks, because clearly, if you look at current spend patterns, it's logical to think adult social care will be a risk for the council going into next year. When English councils were surveyed in 24-25, 80% were overspent in 24-25. So we'll see what the 25-26 position is. We also know evidence says that deprived areas have understandably higher adult social care costs than less deprived areas. I think Scrutiny, you mentioned, Chair, at the start, how this kind of new Scrutiny administration has kind of bedded in. You've been asking sensible financial questions of adult social care in OSMCs up to now. And I think the calculations that Faye's described, there's nothing in there that diverges from the questions that you've been asking and the responses that I've given on record in previous OSMCs. So we might get into some of it later, but how we work around intensity in adult social care, how we manage demand, and similarly for children's services and other high cost areas. So there's kind of some continuity between where Faye and Debbie and the leadership team have got to around answering the question, but also the challenges and questions we've had from Scrutiny over the last few months.
You mentioned that adult social care is 70% of our budget at the moment. Is that percentage actually going up? So is it steady?
It's not that bad. Adult social care by itself isn't 70%. I'll let Faye come in though.
Yeah, adult social care, children's and public health. So when we do that calculation, we look at the gross budget and we look at the gross spend on those areas to then calculate the 70%. We're pulling together all the budgets at the moment and we'll be calculating what it is for 26-27. It has kind of maintained really around the 70% really, yeah, proportionately over the last few years. So we'll, when we do the council report, we'll report what it is for 26-27. It might change by like a couple of percentage or something like that really over the last few years, but it's kind of maintained really in terms of
Relativity.
yeah, in terms of relative, in terms of compared. And like I said, there's the other calculation that looks at the net, which is reported as part of the resilience index, which that is the 79.8% as well. That was based on 24-25, so.
Yeah, thank you. Just one last thing. I know we're now able to forecast the MTFS a lot more accurately, aren't we? Because of the increased years we're now getting the settlement over. I know, and unfortunately, I think the riskiest parts of our budget are going the wrong way over that forecast, aren't they? Even past that, what do you see as us be able to draw a line under some of those and get them under control? What are you forecasting for the future, maybe even beyond the MTFS period? When do you think we might be able to get on top of these some of these items? Yep.
I don't think we'll ever get on top of them if the answer be truth, because what we've got is a disconnect between the mechanism for funding that and the natural demographic pressures that are emerging. Coming back to the council is funded through a number of sources. The business rates redistribution. So if you, even with a really good growth and a housing development that provides the council tax, the revenue support grant is the third prong of that in terms of the resources, as well as there's a boatload of specific grants which we sort of touched at on that previous conversation about the corporate plan. But those three big funding sources really do not match. The council tax was never intended to fund these type of pressures. It was largely about what we call the universal services, bins, parks, blah, 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 blah. There has been a review of how adult services is funded, and that will get reported on in due course. It's been something that's been around, I'm going to say, 10, 15 years into it in terms of adult services funding. So this is because of the funding sources and the services that we are expected to deliver, this is going to be a forever, as it stands, a forever job.
Just to clarify on adult social care, Chair, just so people understand it, we're talking about a national review, Dame Louise Casey's commission, which is going to, I think, hopefully publish an interim report accountable to the Prime Minister this year, but I think this year's report isn't really about funding. I think 2028 is the year that they're proposing to put something in about funding, which requires cross-party support. And as Debbie's saying, we've all read about it in the papers at least for the last decade and a half, but hopefully it will get cracked this time round.
Yes, Sheila, Rebecca?
Just coming in from a children's perspective, I think it's really important to highlight that if we look at the number of children that we have in care, when I joined the council 3 years ago, we had over 530 children in care. As I sit here today, we've got below 500, yet we're still in a position. I think it comes down to a little bit in adults, in my world, is demand. And demand and a market force sometimes, particularly in children's. I think adults is a little bit in a better place. Phil and I have conversations about the children that transfer into adult services that are often in highly restrictive settings with lots of care, lots of support. And adults have got a very different approach and ability through their how settings are registered. Ofsted is very restrictive and it requires certain approaches. And we live in an environment where the market, the private market, is driving some of those pressures. So if you look at the budgetary increase that we've had in children's social care, that can literally be down to one child coming into care, and the cost of that placement is quite significant. So we're doing a lot of work to try and reduce the number of children coming in initially. And I think we're a little bit in front of adults because, as you'll know, the Family First reforms that rely on partnership intervening earlier has had a little bit of extra investment, which is reflected in some of the budget. And we're trying to use that to be transformative, but based on what we know works, to try and stem the demand for children's social care in the future. But that isn't a culture that you can change overnight. So it's strong, steady, deliver, reduce. We will have children with complex lives of experienced trauma that will still potentially need something really specialist, but we know that we would rather have those in that setting, create boosts for our family, empower families to care. So very much about adults empowering the community, families and care in place that's local to them. DSG also, with DSG we are literally trying to reduce the overspend, and again we're expecting the white paper imminently to come and just help us have that discussion about how do we turn this round. And I think it will take again another cultural change around schools playing a pivotal role, and again about inclusion in community, not relying always on a specialist, that being much rarer. So we just need to see how we manage some of that impact over the years, but also recognise, I think, that there are big reviews that are happening with expectation, but I think we're in a strong place to deliver as a leadership team, used to managing a budget, and being able to go, what is the art of the possible, what works? And I think that's what we do. We try to use what works again and again, but it's slow and steady reduction and recognising where we still have challenges around need.
I think, yeah, Faye.
I think just to highlight in the budget report, we flagged those, those significant risks in terms of the reforms, and they're kind of, highlighted as risks in the future. And I think what we're hearing is just the volatility, and that's what we're seeing over the last couple of years, really, in terms of these areas of demand. So I think it is that continued close monitoring, lots of, discussions which we have been having, as part of management team, as part of the executive and as part of overview and scrutiny, in terms of continuing to review and refine and update as we progress throughout this MTFS period.
I think the bottom line is we're hopeful of meaningful government intervention, aren't we, for, at some time down the road, because it's got to that point where that's really needed. So, yeah, no problem with that. Rebecca, next question, please.
What sensitivity testing has been undertaken to show the impact if savings are delayed or only partially delivered?
Thank you, Councillor Booth. So I think I'd like to start by saying we do have a good track record of delivering savings. 25-26 monitoring details 6.4 million of savings being delivered against the overall target of 7.3 million. It's also been reported in our external audit report as well, our annual auditor letter from Grant Thornton, in terms of the historic ability to deliver savings. So that puts us in a good position. What I would like to just highlight is that the budget includes 6.8 million of savings over the 3 years, with 3.7 million in 26-27. And some of these have already been delivered. It's about realigning the budget. So included in those savings is $500,000 for street lighting, energy reductions that we've already seen in 25-26. So it's kind of just realigning the budget, which is also helpful. What I kind of want to, though, highlight is what Debbie said earlier, really, in terms of those are the savings, but there's a lot more kind of effort and work needed to manage the pressures and manage the assumptions and mitigate, to achieve the figures that are in the budget proposals. And maybe it's something that we might need to do in future is, and something we did as part of the, as part of the high needs block, actually, Rebecca, is where we looked at, if we didn't do anything, what would the pressures be? And then we costed as well that cost avoidance, or those mitigations. What's the impact of those mitigations? So you grossed up the overall position, whereas we're kind of doing that and then presenting, right? So if we do all these mitigations, these are what the pressures are. So it's probably although the savings that are included are kind of don't feel massive, really, when you're looking at our overall budget. There's a lot of effort needed to manage those pressures as well. So I suppose really I think we need to be looking at both of those.
If I can just ask, what's the biggest threat to destroying your savings plan? You might have a plan, but what's in the past has caused you not to be able to deliver those? What kind of things happen where you don't meet those targets, and or is it very rare for that to happen? In fact, when you're forecasting savings.
I was going to give the example about the asset rationalisation programme as for example. Target was set 2 years ago, maybe 3 now actually, 3 budgets ago, and we started on that, on examining it, and I think it came evident from the proposals that in order, if we did, because we have done asset rationalisation before as an organisation, partly at the beginning of austerity, so lots of buildings closed, not particularly here, but a lot across the country, just basically hunkered down, closed things. We didn't want that approach. It's not fair on communities. They access these services and our services are delivered from them. So we had to undertake the savings programme far more sensitively by considering information, and we've looked at that every which way. I can talk about it in a bit more detail. But as a result of that by examining it and working with communities, working with the people who access the buildings and frontline service delivery, that's meant that we've needed to consider our options far more carefully, and that engagement and also considering alternatives has just taken far longer than we anticipated. So we started on something, and then once you actually get into the detail, you realise there's a whole load of complications, and sometimes there's some opportunities that arise out of that through those conversations as well. But it therefore takes a lot longer. I have a little adage: if we want to make an omelette, we can crack some eggs. But if you want something more complicated, then it needs more time. So this isn't about just cracking the eggs. This is about being, so it comes down to sometimes the approach you take and the outcome you want. Where we've got to, because we've made significant savings cuts over the last decade plus. There is a greater challenge in terms of, when they talk about low-hanging fruit, we ain't got any low-hanging fruit. We're now at the point where we're really having to deal with really complicated service changes in order to deliver those savings.
I'll ask next question. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Faye.
Sorry, yeah, just to add, in terms of what we have done, like going back previous years, is we had a tendency to put in a kind of more general figure and kind of put it under like digital council or something like that. We have those were notoriously, where it was kind of cross-council and it was kind of an overall programme, those were notoriously difficult to deliver. So we have been more specific in terms of more recently what the actual saving relates to. I think some of the ones that are, as I said, that there's probably 900k not yet been delivered in 25 to 26. Some of those are kind of where the smaller amounts take a lot of effort, and really we need to kind of just push them, we need to kind of get behind some of those. So I think we need to have a look at some of those, and if we can't deliver it, we need to kind of realign or we need to adjust. I think just the one that I was going to mention earlier in terms of that is a risk is the culture and commercialisation, because that is about reducing those costs, but we have mitigated that by spreading it over 3 years.
Lovely, thank you. Question 3, what level of contingency exists if delivery slippage occurs within the first 12 months, please?
Thank you. Yeah, as included in the report, we've got 6 million contingency that's been incorporated. and that has been a strategy really in terms of ensuring we do have some contingency in there. There is, I think actually you talked about assumptions before. We have got an assumption in for the pay award, so we don't know what that is going to be, and obviously due to number of staff, 1% makes quite a big difference. So we have incorporated 3.5% in there, but we don't know what that might be. So we've done a lot of work in terms of estimating inflation, estimating the pressures, but yeah, we've got 6 million currently identified in the report. We are still doing final checks and just doing final updates really in terms of preparing the actual council budget report. So where there might be some changes, it will that's the kind of almost like a bit of the balancing figure really in terms of how much we have in contingency, but we have prioritised really to hold an amount for contingency because of the volatility. What we have done in 25-26 is if that contingency isn't sufficient, we've then needed to look at earmarked reserves, and that's why in that Q2 report we've identified the earmarked reserves that would be needed to balance the budget. So that's that kind of like that second place. We have got general reserves, but we wouldn't be wanting to use the general reserves for this kind of thing. They're for more unforeseen events.
Thank you. Theme 2 then is deliverability and capacity. Question 4. What evidence exists that the council currently has the organisational capacity to deliver transformation savings at the scale and pace that you propose? Please.
I can come in on that first, Chair. Transformational capacity is an interesting one because if you have loads of it, people say, well, what are those people in those transformational jobs? Are they really valuable? So getting back to Debbie's point about there being no low-hanging fruit, when I first got to Doncaster in 2019, we'd just gone through a process of looking at all of our transformational capacity, had quite a lot in different parts of the council, and we consolidated that, made some savings, quite difficult for some colleagues at that time, and coordinated that under Lee's leadership. So, it's kind of a no-win area for councils because you need enough to get the change done, but it can be perceived as wasteful to have too much because people want frontline services to get delivered. So I think we've got a really good balance of that in the council. Also, people like me paid good money. We can't pretend that change is the job of other people. It's my job as well as to run quite a complicated operation, as each of our service directors and executive directors have, but also to manage the change that's required and to own what can be delivered and what can't be delivered. So the way the arrangement works at the moment, which I'm pretty satisfied with, to be honest, is that there is I own what needs to happen. Not I'm in charge of it or I decree it, but it's my responsibility to deliver it, along with my service directors and heads of service. But the capacity under Lee and capacity under Debbie and Faye around financial grip, there's a business partner relationship, and I can talk to those colleagues and they can flex capacity to support me to get the work delivered. So we're back to Debbie's point about low-hanging fruit. We're on the edge with this all the time. We'd all rather have a transformational army to get everything done much more easily. But I think we've reached a pretty good balance in the council. And I don't, unless the magic money tree was to arrive externally, I think we've got a pretty good way of working at the moment.
So I am going to flag that Children's have invested a little bit in strategic leadership to help us with transformation, but that is principally because there's an expectation with some of the budget that we've got from the DFE in relation to how we spend that budget. There's an element of it's about transformation, but it's time limited. So what we've done is we've linked with partners, we've brought in some multi-agency staff that can help us in that space, and we recognise the scale and pace of change that we have over the next 2 to 3 years. but it's time-limited transformation that's very specific and bespoke. We have had some short-term transformation capacity in relation to our SEND agenda, obviously, given the pressures and the overspend, and there's some discussion about whether we continue that following a recent LGA peer review, just because it was recognised that the amount of settings that we need to create, and that we can't all create those, we're very often reliant on schools engaging with us, and then managing the complexity of creating settings, its physical sufficiency. That is something that we are looking at and exploring. But I think echoing in some ways the ethos that Phil has highlighted, which is it's our day-to-day business. There's nothing that we don't do that isn't thinking a bit about forecasting forward. This is how we manage the pressures. This is how I manage my budget. This is how we manage the budget of children and young people's services. So we're looking at very short intervention and often not paying for interim external agency. We're growing capacity within our own services, so using our service expertise, our partnership expertise, because all of the stuff that I particularly need to deliver and Phil does is also really reliant on our partners. We can't do this as a single council entity. Everything we do in the area of change and transformation around adults and children is about working with partnerships. So that's how we've tried to invest a little bit, short-term, time limited, being really explicit and tying it up with our KPIs. Thank you.
Question 5, Councillor Jackson.
Which savings rely on behaviour change, partnership delivery or market conditions outside the council's direct control?
So I can kick that off again, Councillor Jackson. I'm starting a lot of stuff because adult social care spends so much money, so it feels like I should be accountable. I'll draw you to the distinction that Faye made between savings and pressures, and also the comment that Faye made about the vast majority of our savings having been delivered, and I expect absolutely the same to happen this year. So we don't sign up to savings proposals where we think secretly, well, someone else is going to have to do loads to make this happen because I haven't got control over it. So our overall approach in terms of savings, because we've got to responsibly deliver a balanced budget, is to put things, there are risks in savings, but we put things up that we think we can deliver. There'll be ambition and stretch to it, but we're not going to be pointing at people and saying, well, the culture wasn't right or some other organisation should have done this and didn't. I think your question is really relevant to pressures, though. So the sorts of things that come in and grow demand on the side, sometimes for those, issues outside the council's control can generate some of those pressures. So from an adult social care perspective, for example, when the NHS Integrated Care Board decides that people are no longer eligible for NHS continuing health care, and then adults care or children's care for continuing care have to pick up funding, that is an external financial pressure. Doesn't affect us saving, but it does affect the money we're spending. Ditto from an adult's perspective, if when someone goes to hospital, if they're not supported early enough in hospital to work out plans and they're left to lose confidence and physical ability in hospital, then their care needs will be greater when they leave. And Rebecca's already mentioned working with children and young people. So a national survey of adults, directors of social care, back in the autumn said that children and young people who cost, or young adults now costing the council more than £7,000 a week, that number nationally had increased by 30% in a single year. So there's quite a lot of focus on Rebecca and I working together just to help, and Rebecca's already described the different factors that children have to deal with. But I think the sorts of things you're describing are about the pressures that can hit us, but the savings that we set responsibly because we don't want to be making excuses at the end of the year while we haven't done it. So just a distinction.
I think I can kind of echo as well that at the minute, because we're expecting a lot of change, just a really keen example of Children's Wellbeing Act being in the House of Lords. So some pushback from the House of Lords about the multi-agency child protection teams. You know, a lot of areas have spent a year, 18 months gearing up to deliver a multi-agency child protection team. The ongoing debate about whether that will land into statute or won't, and it creates uncertainty. So what we're trying to do is work really closely with the DFE so that we know the changes that are coming over the hill and how that aligns with Doncaster values and ambition. So we are expecting a white paper on send, but we think that we've picked out the right things, which are creating that, you know, additional resource connected to schools. Our ambition is to create a number of places over the next year, 18 months, that actually follow on that ambition from the SEMH hubs that we've already developed, trialled and tested. So again, let's do more of what we do well that creates an inclusion approach for children local to their school. But it is about us reading what the steer of government intent, what that policy and legislation then looks like. So delays on that can sometimes make people feel nervous about gaining and moving and working through with momentum. I can't underestimate, I think we've got amazing ICB colleagues, but the pressure that their functional realignment and costs have had has been really significant, and there's lots of ambition for us to move forward and look at different ways of resourcing some of our very reactive response sometimes to high need, but that takes again a partnership pooling of budgets approach, which is my dream ambition, and used to happen a little bit more before CHC, certainly in children's, but that again takes a real cultural shift nationally as well as locally. So trying to look at how we manage some of those. The government is keen as well, particularly around children's, to some of the new legislation very much promotes making private providers accountable for what they charge and their profits. Adults do this really well. In terms of making that visible and accountable to providers. Children's have a journey to go on to catch up. But if some of those things and levers are in place, that means that we can continue to get best value for the Doncaster pound in relation to children, which means we're getting the best quality outcomes at a fair price. So that's some of the things that we're particularly working on and using our influence to be able to lever nationally, regionally, and at a government level.
Thank you. It's not a question, this, but I don't think it'd be too much to ask while you're all here. Is when the results, when the white paper's presented to everyone, we can see it publicly. It'd be nice for the committee to have a session on that and have it interpreted for us. Would that be something we could do? Right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Kidd, question 6.
I think question 6 has actually been covered, so if it's okay, Chair, I'll go on to question 7. Will the proposed rent increase of 4.8% be adequate to cover the budget pressures on the housing revenue account? If not, what Central Leisure Service areas are likely to be affected? Thank you.
Chair, I'll take that if it's okay. Dan's given his apologies. He's really not well, so we all wish him speedy recovery. Okay, so what you've got in front of you in terms of the HRA is a balanced budget. It's balanced on the basis of the rents increasing by 4.8%, and I think it's worth just setting out that's a statutorily defined rental increase. So it's based on inflation at a particular point in time plus 1%. So the expectation is the HRA works, lives, manages within that resource envelope. It's largely paying for staff, repairs and maintenance. It'll never have enough. We've got assets, again, coming back to the point I was making about asset rationalisation earlier. We've got a deteriorating asset portfolio. You will be aware, many years ago, there were decency homes, there was additional resources provided for largely windows, bathrooms and kitchens. That was decency homes 1. There is talk about decency homes 2, and there is also a question about how that be funded. So the money that's there is largely for keeping the properties that we have up to a standard. And I think so basically managing hopefully, as I'm describing, managing within that resources. Is that covered all the aspects that you wanting, Councillor Kidd?
I think it was just which you mentioned sort of repairs and maintenance. Does that sort of, are we able to meet standards that are sort of nationally accepted, or is it likely to affect those targets that we need to meet?
Yeah, so I think within the HRA, there's probably 3 lenses, that short, medium term. You've got repairs that tenants will raise, and they're absolutely the thing that where the money needs to go in the first instance. There's looking to a little bit longer horizon in terms of the team will set out as part of the condition surveys that are undertaken a more cyclical replacement. So that's the short, that's that medium term, and then there's a longer term horizon based on the condition survey. But does that 4.8% meet all of that? Then I'd probably say the answer is no. It absolutely deals with the here and now in terms of if somebody's boiler busts, and it does deal with the programme that they've set out. But as for it providing the longer term, so there is an expectation, as for example, about becoming carbon zero. We had an estimate undertaken, and I think we said it was something that was short £400 million. So in terms of providing that longer term investment in order to ensure that there's future investment into the fabric of homes, then there's less certainty about that. Coming back to your first question you asked about, we do get money specifically for targeting investment in terms of energy efficiency, but that usually provides for a small number of properties rather than the whole 20,000.
So am I right in saying that some of the longer term preventative measures are suffering, and it catches up eventually, basically?
Yeah, I think the other thing that's kind of been discussed is the rent conversions. So this will be something whereby we can, we were expecting it to be introduced for 26-27, but it's been pushed back to 27-28. So what we can do is, looking forward, is increase the rents. So there's different rents within the social housing. So if you've been in a home for your rents kind of, if new people come in, then it's a different rent. So there's a staggered move in terms of the rent conversion. So what we will be looking at as part of that rent conversions is, well, if we do implement it, then how can we utilise that money on the stock? We're doing some work with St Ledger Homes in terms of, we've now got, I think it's over 90% of the homes that have kind of had a stock condition survey as well. So using that information to work with Savills are supporting us on a 30-year business plan in terms of what needs to be covered over those 30 years. So I think what I'm kind of signalling is we'll be doing more work over the next year, looking at the rent conversions, looking at what the stock condition survey is saying, and then what is that 30-year plan. So for 26-27, we've in the main kind of continued with the plan that what was set previous years, and that 10-year initial plan. But I think what we're saying is we need to look at that 30-year plan and then and review and refine it for next time.
I know you both gave us a little session the other day on budget, and I remember looking at the HRA, and I meant to ask a question then a couple of days ago. I thought I'd shelve it till today. So you remember there's a little section there saying that we have some of the lowest rents in South Yorkshire. I think we're about 13th nationally. The rent policy states that we have the flexibility to raise rent up to 5% above formula, if we choose to do that. But we haven't chosen to do that. Can you just explain why not?
I might have to come back on this one. We have looked at it in previous years, and it doesn't deliver as much income as what it kind of sounds. So I will come back on this. It's a very specific area. It's not saying that we can increase it by 9.8%, for example, but I will I will.
I wish I'd asked you the other day. You
I will
probably could have
circulate a
talked.
response. It is something we have looked. It's a very specific area.
Excuse me, going back to the adult social care budget, we're funding preventative measures that, you know, early intervention, hope people's conditions don't escalate. Are we able to sort of assess in financial terms that we're getting value for money for those measures? Are we able to prove it, measure it? Are we actually spending enough? Thank you.
Yeah, so if I kind of kick that off, the preventative funding that we have and the preventative services we have are in Lee's area. So I'll hand over to Lee in a minute. But I suppose as the Director of Adult Social Care, maybe I'm a customer of the preventative support that there is in the council. First thing to do maybe is see the wood for the trees and see how we compare with others. So if we compare this council with other councils with similar socio-economic kind of backgrounds, so locally Wakefield, Barnsley, Rotherham, North Links, and slightly further afield, kind of like other councils in the northwest and so on. The number of people that we support by adult social care, I suppose you'd say our prevention was slightly better than the average. If we're defining prevention as helping people not need adult social care. So even though we're a pretty deprived area and there's lots of demand in our communities, when we kind of benchmark our numbers, we're slightly better than average. What I would feel a bit wary about, and probably what most of us would feel a bit wary about, is trying to put the shutters up to deny more and more people access to adult social care, because we know that Doncaster people don't ask for much. They're not, they're not demanding. We want adult social care to be there for when they need it. My analysis of the issues in adult social care, or the opportunities in adult social care, they're not so much about prevention, although there's always more we can do, and some of the neighbourhood health work that's starting to develop some momentum could help us work with colleagues in neighbourhoods and get to people earlier and intercept things earlier. But most of the issues, I think, or the opportunities in adult social care are about intensity. So people that have quite intense needs that we could work with a bit better or a bit differently. So we've got some good examples about that in the last year or two. Just the work we've done to increase access to home adaptations, that has meant that connects with maybe fewer older people, especially needing to go into care homes. It also connects with lower, less amount of care required in your own home, because you've got the adaptations you need to be more independent in your own home. And the focus for us now is around, especially adults of working age with quite complex disabilities, including young people who've come through into adulthood. How do we reduce the restrictions that they experience in their day-to-day lives? Sometimes the care that they get is quite restrictive. The settings they're in are quite restrictive, and Rebecca alluded to that earlier. So I think a lot of our work is around intensity. I think, and again, I mentioned earlier I got to Doncaster in 2019. The preventative services I saw in Doncaster then and have largely been preserved and even enhanced. I think they're, from my perspective, they'll be the envy of a lot of other places. But Lee could tell you more.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil. So just building on Phil's sort of context there, I was going to say three things: a little bit about the evidence of preventative approaches, a little bit about what we're doing in Doncaster, and then a couple of examples that sort of bring it to life. So I suppose the first thing around the research on investment in preventative service, this is national research from the Local Government Association, the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, found that for every £1 invested in preventative support, there's an average of £3.17, so a 3-to-1 ratio of savings in future social care costs. So that's the kind of evidence base that we're working with. So there is a proven impact that preventative investment has. So what's our approach in Doncaster? Well, our approach is absolutely about reducing demand for services in the round, particularly for acute services. And our approach is about acting earlier, getting upstream, but doing that in communities and investing in community capacity and capability through our kind of asset-based community development approach. And that's really how we've worked and strengthened, particularly over the last 10 years, particularly with the Well Doncaster team and our neighbourhoods and communities team. And this is about trying to avoid costs and getting to the root causes of ill health and the inequalities that result from it, and trying to tackle some of those issues at the root cause. And often those solutions, I think, as we all know, are in the community themselves, going in and trying to provide services and telling communities what's right for them is absolutely not the right thing to do. So we spent a lot of time and effort and energy, and I know members will be aware of this, engaging with residents in the community in the context of where they live about what it is that they would like to see improved in their local area, in their local patch. And by doing that, we're creating the conditions for people to be more self-reliant, have more self-help, more agency in their own lives, and access the support they need when they need it, rather than us saying to people, here's something that you can have anything as long as it's this colour or this size. So that's the approach that we've taken, and we've absolutely tried to build on the strengths that we've developed over the last few years. And just as an example, we had a peer review Phil actually commissioned, I think it was in early 25. From an independent organisation that was specialist in looking, community and voluntary organisation that was specialist in looking at the sort of front door really of services, and that was found a lot of strengths and significant strengths in Doncaster's approach, particularly how we engaged early, how we tried to support and build capacity in communities and voluntary and community organisations through the support that we provide, through making sure we've got that alignment across teams and services across the council and across partners, so that we're working together better to support residents and communities. And also the investment that we've made in the voluntary and community sector. It's clearly not enough because the voluntary and community sector is a struggling sector, but the report recognised and acknowledged that great work that's been done to strengthen and support the voluntary and community sector. Organisations like the CAB, for example, is a really Citizens Advice Bureau is a really good example, as well as those really hyper-local organisations that we have. And just to give a couple of examples of some of the things that the services that we've put in place and the resources that we invest do. So in our neighbourhoods and wellbeing service, that's really to provide support, low-level support to people in communities. And the service through our neighbourhood officers and wellbeing officers provide rapid response when we get issues that are raised, so we can provide support quickly within 72 hours. We provide support on some of those low-level issues that maybe would have cost more if they'd been going into sort of higher cost services and statutory services. We work with people with their more moderate needs, acting as sort of trusted assessors to try and broker in the support that those people need. And we're not time bound. We don't limit it to you've only got a certain number of weeks or a certain number of sessions or engagements. It's really about what does the person need. And just some evidence about the costs of assessment through this route versus the sort of more sort of statutory social care assessment costs. The evidence we have is that the wellbeing case assessment cost is £400 per case, and the social care assessment costs are £9,000 per case. So you've got a real difference there in terms of the cost of that engagement and that assessment as well. And in 25-26, our wellbeing officers manage 458 cases across Doncaster. So another example I want to use in terms of some of our preventative work is the work we do to support carers, because obviously carers are the sort of unsung heroes in many cases in terms of the work that they do in the community. And evidence suggests from the UK government that unpaid carers save the UK government and the UK PLC £184 billion annually. So for Doncaster, that would equate to £1 billion annually. And the work that we do to support those carers as a number of things. We help to provide assessments in terms of what support can they access and how can we help them to access that support, provide ongoing wellbeing support for residents and support them with direct payments of up to £750 per year. And we've done a lot of work working with Phil's team and colleagues over this last 7-8 months really, since April 2025, to reduce the amount of time that people are having to wait for those carer assessments and the support that they get. So we've really tried to make sure that all of the things that are in the system that are there to support can be in place to support our residents. Obviously, we have a broader position around prevention as well, and I don't know, Rachel, if there's anything you want to add from a broader public health perspective.
Yeah, so thanks, Chair. So from a public health primary prevention perspective, we have specific public health ring fence grant to keep people healthy as well, and we invest that in a number of different ways. Keeping people healthy also, well, reduces costs on services, but also creates a strong economy as well. We need healthy people out busy and working too. So and it's quite interesting, one of the bugbears of directors of public health, that prevention and return on investment for prevention is often held as a kind of standard evidential layer than other treatment services. So we're often asked to demonstrate what the value is of prevention services, and luckily we can do that in lots of different ways, some of which Lily has just described, but wanted to talk about social return on investment as well. So if you think about and just describe Dance On as a programme that we've got, so it's a programme run by Darts, bringing people together to dance, so that improves their strength and their balance, reduces the risk of falls, will reduce the risk of costly falls to the NHS and social care. But actually, some of the value that brings about is building a relationship between the people that get together weekly. It builds volunteering skills for people that support that service. It keeps a civic building busy and open in the daytime, and people then visit the cafe afterwards. So as well as being able to demonstrate reduced costs on a fall happening, it also builds that social return on investment as well. And we have commissioned studies around DCLT, the Leisure Trust as well, on what their social return on investment is. Just to highlight some of the things that we are responsible for commissioning in public health that will keep people healthy and stop them being more expensive in the future. So things like drugs and alcohol services and smoking cessation services as well. So a number of those services we must commission for our population, and it might be longer term, but that will reduce risk and reduce cost on our services in the future.
So Children and Young People Services in Doncaster have a really strong history of retaining what were the sure starts into the family hubs, and obviously securing family hub investment. And as you'll see through the new Best Start for Life agenda, work really closely with public health colleagues to commission services that can coalesce in those family hubs, creating community space that people feel happy and able to come and access, a more universal, getting healthy offer, but then also thinking a bit about how we put that prevention into need escalating upwards. So again, as the family's first agenda comes forward, what we're trying to do again is just use those spaces and places, because Doncaster is a place of places, and that's what I've learned in my time here. Every area is a little different, and having those hubs allows us to think about that. That's then complemented by the ongoing youth investment that we have in Doncaster as well. So thinking a bit about how do we support the 0 to 5s, that family up into adolescence and teenage years. And what you'll see is we've got that ongoing commitment to a really clear youth strategy. We've been on a journey about how we create spaces around youth. If we listen to what young people said, it's just like, can we not have free Wi-Fi everywhere outside? They'd be quite happy with that. And we go, that kind of defeats the objective of an active youth strategy. So we continue to have those conversations about how can we scale up intervention, but make sure it's at a place where communities want to access it. And just thinking back to Phil's point of how we create the accessibility for service connection is really, really important. So, as I say, work really closely across the piece with communities, thinking a bit about lots of work through the Thrive model currently as well, about how do we coalesce our agendas so that actually families don't need to see 3 people that are all trying to do the same job. So again, working closely with St Ledger, thinking a bit about how in the communities do they know our children, how does health visiting know our children, just so that we can say to families, you don't need 4 of us coming, there's 1 of us coming, and we've got a place where you can come and see the rest of us. So I think we've got places, we've got space, and I think we've got ambition in terms of maximising our prevention.
Thank you. What you said firstly, the return on an investment initially is really encouraging that. So normally we don't get much return on some of the things we do, but on that we do. It's like a good return. So that's why obviously it's really important. I think probably next question is for you, Rachel. Continued healthcare funding is stated to be reducing in South Yorkshire, adding to future funding pressures. What are the possible consequences of this, and what are the contingencies in place for that as well?
So it's not me, it's Phil, so I'll hand over to Phil. No problem.
Yeah, continuing healthcare affects adult social care. Continuing care affects children's So probably you got used to the Rebecca and me double act, so we'll just do that. It's a good question. That there are huge concerns about retractions in NHS continuing healthcare nationally, not just in South Yorkshire. When we look at Doncaster statistics published by the NHS, we do see that people are being authorised, new people are being authorised for NHS continuing healthcare under fast track rules, which means they're believed to be in the last 12 weeks of their lives. But we only see a tiny handful of Doncaster people authorised outside of that. Now, to be clear, NHS continuing healthcare wasn't intended for people who are just at the end of their lives. It's for everyone whose needs are of a complexity that it will be unlawful, and there is case law about this, for the local authority to provide. So the consequences of that sort of retraction, which is obviously one of the questions in people's eligibility, are numerous. So it means Doncaster people get care from the council that they're means tested for, which they would receive free at the point of use if they were funded by NHS continuing healthcare. It means that Doncaster people get oversight from council staff for complex health and care needs that should more appropriately have come from NHS professionals. It means that care and support providers are funded by the council for complex care arrangements that again might have benefited more from NHS oversight. And of course, there's a significant financial implication for the council and for council taxpayers from funding very high cost arrangements for people with the highest care needs. In terms of the point about contingencies, it's a matter for the Integrated Care Board to assess who's eligible for NHS continuing healthcare. It's not a matter for us. We have a contributory role in the assessment and the decision that the ICB make, but we aren't decision makers. Where the council feels that the Integrated Care Board hasn't followed lawful process, in theory there's potential redress via a disputes resolution policy, but it is, I'll use the word clunky and pretty slow. And Doncaster people also have their own route of redress via an individual complaints process, but I suspect that many won't know about that. One contingency the council hasn't chosen to apply would be refusing to provide care for people with really complex needs, because that would feel irresponsible. I'll just hand over to Rebecca.
And I think in children's, the continuing healthcare funding is never as clear. It's a lot more grey about when we achieve that funding. Again, often it's very much based traditionally on a health need. So if a child has a tracheostomy, it's a clear, visible, additional health need. But we have achieved some success working really closely through the partnerships we have locally, and specifically in Doncaster around achieving some contributions, some significant contributions into some of our children that have potentially significant need lived to their lived experience, as well as potentially an organic, not yet understood need. So I think we've had some very positive relationships. However, as Phil has alluded to, the national agenda and the reconfiguration isn't bearing that in mind, and there is a position that everybody will be the same, and the footprint on the South Yorkshire basis isn't the same. So we know that there is some turbulence coming, and as I say, for me, sometimes I see that investment as reactive investment. My argument with my ICB colleagues has always been, how can we get into the proactive space? So when we think about contingencies, I'm in a place where I can't not provide care, very much as Phil, but I literally can't not provide care, because usually I hold parental responsibility for that child. They are mine, effectively. So we are often in a place where that is how we've got in this position around markets. However, what we are looking at doing is how we work proactively with our providers and colleagues about creating communities of practice that allow us to better support the children locally and not get to the escalation stage. So we're looking at expanding our short break setting, because we know that we've had some really, really positive progress about keeping children at home with family through extended short breaks. But often that's residential short breaks, so can we extend our short break provision? But then also thinking about, can we create settings where services that are local to Doncaster can come in and wrap around those children, rather than always having to go out, sometimes for a high cost placement outside of Doncaster. So I suppose our contingencies are an expectation that as I said before CHC, there was some principle of pool budgets. There are discussions. I'm not saying that that's the way that people will go. I think there is a bit of a moral expectation that there will be some contribution for some of this, but it may look very different. It may not be a payment towards placements. It may be an investment in more staff that work together, how we work together. And that is coming, I think, but it will be driven by a national agenda and then shaped locally. Much more shaped on a South Yorkshire footing is what we're expecting. But there is also work to do locally, and the South Yorkshire DCS are very aligned, so Rihanna's colleagues across South Yorkshire, about looking at regional care commissioning, which can include that joint commissioning. So I think there's a lot more discussion about how we create joint commissioned arrangements, again, to just provide that surety at the point of commission. So we're not getting into that discussion of, you've paid for this level of care, we don't agree with this level of care. What we're saying is let's commission it at the outset. But that takes us aligning approaches, and health and social care can sometimes feel very different. But that's our ambition around trying to create that contingency so that we shift the culture and we're not as reliant on the money coming in the reactive high cost, but actually investment in more preventative work.
Sorry, just to add, as Rebecca's highlighted, and in 25-26 we got just over 3.4 million, I think, for CHC for children's. So as well as the kind of more kind of service contingencies, that again aligns with, I think, Councillor Booth's question really in terms of overall contingency, and the contingency, because it's the same contingency for precious savings, you know, so that's kind of also supported why we need that contingency as well in our budget.
Before I just move on to the next question, Phil, you mentioned a provision there that the Doncaster people probably don't know about. Do you remember saying that? It's a specific provision that's available, and you said Doncaster people probably don't know about this. Is that something we can rectify?
We can publish, we can share it. I mean, to be honest, I just want to, I just briefly echo what Rebecca said. ICB people are good people, so I'm not seeking to demonise them. But I think it's a bit like when we have a complaints procedure and we don't let Doncaster people know we've got a complaints procedure, they don't know how to complain. Well, we don't do that, actually. We're pretty good at inviting people to complain if they're not happy. But I think what we hear from around around continuing healthcare is people don't always know that they can complain, don't always know how to complain. So it's the ICB's complaints process, and it's about that being publicised for people as they kind of come through. Yeah, and we talk to colleagues about it. I think that they would say that they do make people aware about it, but I think some of the feedback would be that people aren't always aware of their rights in the situation.
And there's probably a human nature element to this as well. If you're dealing with with a family member or a loved one with a really complex or a medical condition that's new or has been exacerbated, how much space and time do you have to pull yourself and bring yourself together to follow some of these, what can be set out as quite formal avenues? And sometimes I know we get approaches through you guys in your elected member roles as well. And we've got advocacy support that's available as well to people in Doncaster that can help them navigate some of those systems. So I think some of it is publicising, but also it's enabling people to find the channels and be supported through the channels that will help them as well.
Thank you for that. Rebecca, next question.
So back to you, Rebecca. What factors are driving the 1.1 million overspend in the children's social care?
So the projected outcome at Q2 is 1.12 million, which was an increase of 0.68 million since Q1. So that pretty much can sometimes, like I highlighted before, can be down to one young person coming into care, and we predict that then for the period that we think they're going to be in care, and usually that is at least until the end of the financial year. So in summary, the breakdown of spend often relates at the moment to additional demand. So where we've projected how many children we think we'll have in external residential, we're slightly above that at the moment, but then that is slightly buffered by the fact that our average placement cost has come down a little bit. So yes, we have had a slight increase in residential young people, but actually some of those have not been the higher cost end. But that shows that we've got a gap in our sufficiency about how we create more family-based placements for young people. Sometimes we have had pressures where young people are going into residential, so that's about how we emphasise our residential care and our kinship. So that's one of the factors. What we've also got as well that we still report on is up until about 2 or 3 years ago, we did used to claim from the DSG a portion of funding that would buffer the costs of the placement, but actually as time goes by, it becomes clearer and clearer what you can and can't do with some of those high need spend. So what we're also doing is that while it's a higher cost for us, there is a buffering on the DSG, which seems a bit ironic given how high the DSG is, and you may think, really? But yes, so what we try to do is spend that money with purpose. We try to stay within the guidance and regulation that we're given so that we can't be challenged back to say you're spending that money inappropriately. So we as a council have become very clear, very transparent about we might have had this covered before by the DSG, but actually we can't now. So we are trying to manage, again, some of those pressures out that are created by that really clear stance on what you can and can't spend DSG on. That also reflects sometimes the complexity of the little people that we're working with. They may have been eligible for some portion of that spend before, but now they're not. So I think that's significant. The other bit that we've got is that we have, as I said, we've got the CHC money, so that buffers a little bit. So where sometimes there's higher costs, we have had some successes, I suppose is what I'm saying. It's not enough to address the overspend, which is unfortunate and is something I keep a very close eye on. We do a care ladder every month. We look to see which children are coming in, which children are coming out. And we work tenaciously to invest in interventions. We have launched two new teams over the past 3 months with investment from Families First, and that's linked to supporting children to go home and be reunified. And we currently have that programme working with 10 young people, and at least half of those are currently in residential care. So if they're successful, that's an amazing outcome for that young person, but it also has it's that best value, isn't it? Are we supporting that young person to be in the right environment at the right time? And then are we also being able to say we're using less high cost resources in a place where we don't need to because our sufficiency is better? So there's some of the things that we're doing at the moment. We have also really positively reduced our agency spend. We still do have some agency spend. That's currently buffered by the fact that we have excellent vacancy management. So I think I echo what colleagues have said about what we try to do sometimes is make sure that we stress test the dynamic change of staffing. So sometimes we might need staffing in certain areas, but for a period of time we might not have the same demand. So what we tend to do is hold vacancies to see how that demand unfurls. What I would say is the success that Doncaster's had about retention of social workers is really, really positive. When I came here, I'm going to sound like a broken record, 3 years ago, there were 48 social work vacancies. We now have 3. And that's because the agency support has helped us grow our new social workers. It's helped us cover vacancies. And I have to say at the minute, our experienced social workers are coming from our vacancy converts. So people that come, work here, are often saying, I want to stay. So I think the trajectory is coming down, again, slow and steady. But if we plotted that out, our agency cost is reducing. And I think that's a really strong message in terms of where we are as a council and a place to be, people like the outcomes and ambitions that we have. So all of that, stable workforce, means we feel braver about supporting reunification. We feel braver about managing children because we're not moving from social worker to social worker. So for me, it is an overspend, but I see it as something that if we can manage the demand and the need and some of that prevention work starts to kick in a little bit more, it will be better. And we'll be able to steadily reduce that. And our ambition is to try and over the next 4 years to really reduce our number of children in residential by 20%. And we think we can do that slowly and steadily with some of the work that we've got in place. And a portion of those will be children that need residential, externally, high cost placements, but we'll always have a few of those. But that is primarily what creates the fluctuation in the spend. A couple of young people sometimes with increased need, it can really significantly swing that budget and overspend. Is that helpful?
Some of those things are really good to hear, Rebecca. Thank you for that. And Rebecca might have answered part of your next question. Do you still want to ask it?
You know, you mentioned about agency. What is the percentage of your agency staff that you've got overall your residential, you know, with your social workers and everything? Is it still quite a lot of, have you still got quite a lot of agency staff, more than what you have employed staff, or no?
So, Rotherham invested made a significant commitment to support AYCs, so social workers that are new into practice, to have an agency worker that worked alongside them for a period of time. So the vast majority of agency workers that are having children's social care at the moment are working closely in the teams where we've over-recruited newly qualified staff. That creates a psychological safety that's meant that people want to stay with us, but also our experienced staff want to stay with us, because normally if you don't have that investment, it's the experienced staff that carry all the risk. They're the ones with a really high caseload. So what we are doing is gently reducing that. So our programme of support will start to cease over the next 6 months. So we will start to see a steady decrease. We have had some agency in supporting our residential, which traditionally we didn't used to do, but actually we worked really closely with the unions, and what we noticed was staff were doing a lot of overtime, our current staff, and actually if we weren't careful we were going to get to burnout. So we've said we'll use agency, we don't want our current staff to burn out. So I can get you the percentages because they do change obviously month by month, but I'm just mindful I probably need to give you the breakdown of what's agency support in residential and what's within social care, and then we have a couple of team manager roles, but again one of those is converted recently. So maybe we don't. You know, it's a changing piece. So let me get you the figures for Q2, which relate to the spend.
That's fine. And it's fine about the next question, that's fine.
Thank you. In terms of interest rates, so in our risk assessment on reserves, we have a risk in terms of the treasury management, and we've currently got short-term borrowing of circa 140 million, and we've got under borrowing of about 60 million. Under borrowing is just basically where we use our reserves, our cash balances, so we don't kind of automatically borrow, for example, the capital programme. We manage it based on the cash flow, based on the cash amount we've got, rather than kind of saying, oh yeah, well we need this for our capital programme, so we'll just take out that borrowing. No, we look at what cash we've got and what we actually need in terms of to manage and to optimise that, because obviously borrowing has a cost, so if we can avoid that, then that's better. What we've kind of had a look at really in terms of if interest rose by 1%, then the impact on that 200 million could be 2 million. Just as a basic calculation. Now that borrowing position is for the housing revenue account and the general fund, so that wouldn't all impact on this revenue budget, but we'd have to have a look at the split. It is unlikely that short-term or under borrowing would need to be replaced, and there is regular monitoring, so there is mitigation. We've also included in the report our treasury management advisors kind of plot out what the forecast is for interest rates moving forward. And there's a table both in the monitoring information and in the Treasury Management Strategy Statement report as well, or TMSS for short. So really, and what they're forecasting is that those interest rates will decline over the next year as well. So in terms of that risk, although we have provided and put a figure in the risk assessment of reserves, in terms of likelihood, it's probably not too likely, but we need to kind of make sure we're factoring it in case, you know, something does happen. So at the moment, the figure that's included in there is 4 million, so that's based on a 2% increase and would be over the 2 years. In terms of demand-led services, I think we've talked a lot about this meeting and previous OSMCs as well, in terms of those monitoring positions, those pressures increasing. So the service pressures that we have got in the budget for 26-27 amount to 15.6 million. The 25-26 overspend on those demand-led areas is 7.8 million. So that gives you some context really in terms of those high areas and that volatility as well. And as we've heard today, really in terms of how we're managing and mitigating those pressures, those actions in place. So. Thank you. Yeah, so that's detailed in the Treasury Management Strategy Statement report, our TMSS. That it looks at how much we require in terms of, and estimates how much we require in terms of borrowing over the forthcoming, over the forthcoming 4 years, 4 years. Trying to think, is it 3 or 4? Our revenue budget's 3, or TMS is 4. So yeah, that forecast, so it looks at, I think the difficulty, and I must say, the difficulty we have had in doing the Treasury Management Strategy Statement is all the changes. So that takes into account our dedicated schools grant deficit, for example. So when we're looking at what's the working capital over the next 4 years, that has been particularly challenging because we haven't got, some of the information. So I think what we have done is we've focused on 26, 27, and we know, and we will be reviewing the next 4 years, over that period, because we kind of, like you say, we look at what current loans we've got, what's the forecast for moving forward in terms of what we need for our capital programme. We also know, in terms of our capital programme, we do have slippage. So although we have over 200 million in there for 26, 27, what we do find is there is slippage, and when we get into Q1, a lot of the time that's reduced. So we have to take all those kind of factors into account when we're setting our Treasury Management Strategy Statement in terms of what could happen. The main requirement for the Treasury Management Strategy Statement is to set those indicators, those prudential indicators, and make sure that we're retaining within those as well when we're monitoring moving forward. So yeah, so that's the main budget report where it.
Rebecca, do you mind taking, have you got the questions in front of you? Do you mind taking question 15, please, for Maria?
Sorry. Can officers demonstrate where consultation feedback resulted in material changes to proposals rather than simply validation of decisions already taken? Can you provide examples of this, please?
Thanks, I'm going to answer that one if that's okay. So we've obviously got an ongoing engagement process, which we do throughout the year. And we've talked about some of that, I think, in the context of the city borough strategy and also the corporate plan. So we had things like the big neighbourhood conversation over the autumn period, and we've had things like the big city conversation. We've had engagement around our community safety strategy, around our culture and heritage work as well. So there's a whole range of ongoing engagement. So the approach we try and take is use that engagement to inform the proposals and the priorities that are obviously set out in the corporate plan and in the budget. So I'll give a couple of examples in a minute, but just I suppose one thing just to reflect on, given the conversation we've had, is the significant amount of resources that we have on adults and children's social care, and it's not really come through today, but I just want to highlight how much work goes from an adults and children's point of view that colleagues are doing to work with communities about how those services are designed and how they work and how they operate, so that there's a real kind of co-production effort there with young people and with different cohorts in adult social care. So those big areas of spend that we talk about, they're absolutely got Doncaster residents, young people at the heart of how those services develop. Obviously that leaves us with, as we know, with the budget position, obviously not that much left, if that makes sense, for other things. But what we do have is some really good examples, I think, of where the feedback from residents about what's important to them has informed some of the proposals. So if I just give a few examples. In the big neighbourhood conversation, the kind of roads and the condition of roads and the how they people experience them in their communities was one of the key things that came out very, very strongly. And one of the things in the budget is obviously the road improvements. I think it's 60 million over 4 years, including highway resurfacing schemes and various other things. So that's a really good example of investment in something that's really tangible that residents have said is really important to those. That's one example. Another one is around the look and feel of the local community, that regeneration of sort of town centres. And again, as Rebecca said, Doncaster is a place of places. So there's investment in across the whole of the city in different ways. Some of that's through the grants that we've had through government for things like Pride in Place or Town Deals or Levelling Up Fund. Some of that's through our local discretion resources that's been invested in neighbourhood renewal. And a good example is the Bentley resources and also Asken that was identified as well. So there's those examples, and obviously that's in the budget as a line, but the detail that sits below it is very much how that's spent is dependent on what people are saying and what residents are saying in terms of how they want that money to be spent. We've also mentioned investment in leisure facilities. And our investment in leisure facilities is absolutely about those leisure facilities, but it's also what does the impact of those leisure facilities have. So in terms of keeping people healthy and well and fit, we've got good evidence that those leisure centres provide a really high return on investment. I think it's 5.6 for every pound we invest, £5.60 back in terms of broader social impact, in terms of people living longer, healthier lives, etc. So ongoing investment in those facilities is really important. And again, the Edlington example is one where it's something that the community really want and they've said that they wanted, and there's investment in the capital programme for that. And then a couple of other examples around safety, and obviously people wanting to feel safe in their communities, wherever that is. And obviously an example that's in the budget is an extra, I think it's 900,000 or £1 million to support safety measures in and around the city centre and other places. And then there's other examples I could use around pupil lifestyle survey, where we listen to what young people feel is important and obviously make sure that the services support them, and also our investment in parks and green spaces, because again, through the big neighbourhood conversation, people have said they value the green space, they value nature, they value being able to get out with their family and friends or walk the dog or whatever. So having that quality green space and continuing to invest in that is really important.
Can I just clarify and emphasise that those areas of investment were a direct result of public consultation? Is that what you say? Is that those have steered that?
Yeah, I mean, there's different levels to it. So some things we're mandated by government with resources, but the way we spend it, how we deploy it, what we focus it on, absolutely dependent on what people are saying is important to them. And there's lots and lots of different examples of, I think we could point to where that's been the case. Yeah.
I think it's just really important to highlight that, I think, especially for anybody who listens to this, is that they actually are listened to. Because we all knew that these consultations have gone on, and we've all been told about how many people engaged in them, but it's only just come to light now what the fruition that's led to some investment. So I think as long as the people out there realise that when they do take the time to tell us what's important to them, then we do act on it. Yeah, absolutely, and we keep needing to close that loop and sort of say, you said this, and this is therefore what we collectively have done. And there's again a number of levels to that, right through to what's happening on the ground in communities. So where we have our teams working together on the ground in particular places, that's often taking the feedback that people have given us. So again, I'll use another example. We were talking about it in the North Members Network before Christmas around the work around off-road bikes, for example, something that residents have said is really important. And then there's work done with multi-agency, with the police, with the council officers and others to sort of stop that. And some of the feedback we were talking about in that we had from members was actually residents are starting to see a benefit of that. So it shows that people flagging up and reporting things and having their voice heard, and absolutely holding us collectively as a council to account for what, and partners to do the work is, has an impact, definitely.
Yeah, so just to add, it really is baked in as a method of co-production. We wouldn't have it any other way. We wouldn't want to invest money. We wouldn't want to develop services that didn't meet the needs of people in Doncaster. So things like future parks as well. So we knew that we had some investment to make. And sometimes it's the methodology. So sometimes it's an ask, check and ask again, because actually sometimes the first answer you get might not be the most thoughtful, so some of that's in methodology. The other thing that I would say as well is just around our approach. So we use things like appreciative inquiry, so having questions with our residents, but always ensuring that we're able to get a diverse mixture of views. So often when we release a survey and we look at the demographics, we'll get input really quickly from some of our residents, and it can take a different approach. So thinking of our more minoritized communities, people that might not have access to IT. So as well as the big surveys and big approaches, we'll take a bit of a stock check. What have we got? Who have we missing? What do we know the population is like in Doncaster? And we might have a different approach. So really good example through the Remake Learning Festival as well, and we were having the city centre conversations. So Doncaster colleagues sat with Plasticine in Remake Learning and sat with children and young people of Doncaster, and they used creative health approach. So they were building the things that they wanted to see out of Plasticine. So that co-production approach isn't a one size fits all, and we need to make sure that we've got different methods for engaging with our communities too.
Yep, but I think probably to close this is there's 55 sets of eyes and ears out there from the councils. We all owed surgeries, and I think we'd encourage, like, for people who do listen to this, we encourage you please to, because we might do a survey once every couple of 3 years or something like that, but we can be surveyed any time you want because we're out there and we're having the meetings every week. And I think we've mentioned it before in OSMC that the elected members are a really good point of contact for people who don't wait for the next survey. Come and tell your councillor, and then we can feed it back into the system. So I think it's worth making a note of that within this meeting, that we really like to encourage that as well, because it keeps those, it reinforces those. You want to know, like, in between surveys, are those still the same problems? Well, we can confirm or deny that by the interactions we have with the public, yeah?
Totally, and if it's okay to come back, Chair, absolutely, and things like the ward member meetings that happen every month across Doncaster for every ward, where that's a great opportunity, and it's not the only opportunity, but it's a great opportunity for that two-way conversation, isn't it, around what are you picking up as ward members, what are the sort of priorities for that area, what are people saying, how's it going, and having a collection of officers from across the council around that table to say, okay, then what are we doing about it? And obviously some of the challenges are very not easy to fix, some of these things, but it's about constantly chipping away at it, and as you say, kind of working together. And then the networks of members coming together on a quarterly basis for each locality. Again, there's a bit of sharing and learning to be done there too.
Prompted, I think, by the fact that you said something about surveys, we do, and picking up on Rachel's point, we engage right across the piece, because I was thinking about even things where there's little highways that are amended, or you know, paths that are adjusted, or any small amount of investment. Typically, there is conversations taking place about what's happening and why and how we might do that. So I was prompted by Lee's point about the off-road bikes. The amount of conversations that have been taken about the nature of the design for there's a proper name for them and I haven't got it in my head, but you sort of the barrier so that it prevents just bikes whizzing down. And believe it or not, we've had loads of conversations about that, because depending on where it is and the nature of the things, the activity, whether it's path or cycles, there's different types of approaches that can be incorporated into the design of that capital works. And the team spend, so it's not just, I think, in the spirit of your making the point to the public that your voice counts. It counts on so many levels. It's not just about big conversations that take place. It's about we engage as much as we can on all these minor investments that we make as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Question 16, Councillor Jackson, please.
Excuse me. How have issues previously raised through OSMC's quarterly finance and performance monitoring influenced this budget?
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. I suppose I'd like to go back to when Alan kind of was talking earlier about the previous conversations about the corporate plan and about, you know, the performance review, the service standards, and, you know, all the discussions we've had as part of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee in terms of presenting and discussing, so being fully transparent in terms of what the pressures are, what the service standards, the performances, and having those conversations around what's driving those pressures, so I think all those discussions that we've had in terms of overview and scrutiny, then that's, you know, 25, 26 is almost like the starting place really in terms of them developing the 26, 27 budget proposals. And a lot of the budget proposals, what you'll see in those pressures have been, you know, have come from 25, 26 and have been discussed as part of Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee as well, like Phil referenced adult, you know, previous discussions on adults and things like that. And that's kind of like the starting really position really in terms of starting to develop the 26, 27 budget. I don't know whether others want to say a bit more really in terms of any specific areas.
Yeah, I mean, just for example, back in September, Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee asked me about out-of-area care home placements, which are unless you really want to move outside Doncaster, I guess some people want to live outside Doncaster. You know, most people generally would want to stay with their friends and family in their local neighbourhoods. But we know that sometimes people are moving out, not through their own choice, but because they're told there's nothing available for you here. So that question's been asked. We've given that quite a lot of focus and attention, not only on trying to reduce the number of people that have to move outside Doncaster, kind of developing our own sort of provision a bit more, but also making sure that people who are outside Doncaster, we are keeping in touch with them and keeping them safe. And some of those assumptions about placement numbers and some of those costs attached, they've driven some of the budget strategy work. So the questions that you ask, we're not just paying lip service to them. They're like today's been a set of really good questions, and I think we've had that this municipal year. Some really good questions from Scrutiny that they felt like the right questions, and we've used them to drive some of the kind of planning and budget strategy actions that we've put in place.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Maria, are you oh, go on. Okay, thank you.
So this is on behalf of Maria. Which outcomes within Doncaster delivering together are most exposed if savings are underperformed?
I'll probably start this off if that's okay. I don't think there's, as we've referenced earlier, it's not necessarily about savings. This year is not, given the scale of it in relation to the resources that we have at our disposal. I think you've probably heard a lot of what from my colleagues. It's about managing pressures. That is basically our key challenge. And as a result of that, therefore, it's in terms of the themes, the area that's going to, if we don't get that right, then it's going to be around healthy, happy and long lives. Because if we don't get that right, in terms of what people have been talking about, the early help, the prevention work, then that's going to impact on people's ability to live healthier and happier and long lives. And then, as you've heard, around nurturing the challenges around children's services, whether it be from a child protection perspective or from an educational perspective, the challenges that we've been talking about. If we don't get the level of sufficiency right, that resource in Doncaster, then that's obviously going to impact on the child and the family. So I would probably say it's those two areas, given the scale of resources from the budget that's on those particular areas. They're going to be the areas where there be the most impact if we don't manage the service delivery, less so the delivery of savings, but actually managing the resources we have as effectively as we can.
And I would say probably as children's services, we're extremely mindful of that. We're aware that every extra pound we spend has an impact, and I'm sure Phil would appreciate, sometimes it's not always been adults, it's been children's that have been the overspender. So I think there's a dynamic understanding that we've hopefully showed as a leadership team, that we don't just tackle this as this is my area and it's that. We're aware that every extra pound that needs to be squeezed comes out of something that might impact for yourselves as well, because actually not all of our communities need child protection services. So sometimes the spend that we're having to do is to keep safe and do the statute stuff, the legislative regulatory stuff we need to do. But I think we work as a team, and that's how I manage my team, which is we keep a grip on this, we make the right decisions at the right time, and sometimes we make tough decisions, and we balance that risk really carefully, because we're aware that if we're not managing that, the pressure is often carried by other departments. But I think we coalesce and work and go, what can we do? How could we sometimes shift rather than stop something? Or that bit of how do we work better at aligning what we do through a system lens rather than doing it individually. So that's my reflection of the support I feel I get from colleagues as a big spender.
Thank you. And just to add to what colleagues have said, the outcomes are all kind of related as well. So I totally agree about the focus on the ones we've just described. If we don't support our residents to be healthy and live longer lives, then our economy is not going to grow. We're not going to have people fit in work. We're not going to have that resilience as a place. So the outcomes are all connected. But fundamentally, if people have better well-being, better access to services that live longer and healthier and happier lives, then the rest of the outcomes are easier to achieve.
Yeah, we're probably not going to be able to cover it today, but regarding the OSMC work plan for the rest of the year, I think it's really important to make sure that you are happy that we come to you at some time and do deep dives on some of the things you're dealing with, so we can find out how hard you're working at it. You know, because until we do that, people just hear you say we're working hard at it. I think it's down to us as well to find out how hard you're working at it, where you're striving to achieve these things. And that's going to be, you know, for example, looking at the things on the strategic risk register, they're going to become fundamentals of this OSMC work plan. And it'll help us to understand the difficulties you're having, you know, with delivering services. We need to, it's not just saying that the headline figures are sat there, of course they are, but let's also find out how hard you're working at this, trying to get on top of it. I think you deserve that, and the people out there deserve to know how hard you're doing it as well. So that's what OSMC is going to look to. It's just that we're probably not going to cover the work plan today, so I just wanted to drop that in there. Before the last question, we will have time for a couple of questions, if there is any, from the balcony. So if I'll come back to you in a few minutes. Is that all right, Dave? So last question from me then is, where has the executive consciously accepted increased risk, and how was that judgment reached, please?
Start that off, if that's okay, Chair. I think we've already talked on some of this, because when we were talking about the corporate plan, this sort of it was there was a bit of a blend going on there. I mentioned it's an art, not a science. We start with the corporate plan, we start with a policy objective, we're setting those priorities, and I've talked about those sort of horizons, short, medium term, long term. And we I think in amongst you've probably heard, and I think you've referenced yourself as well, we start with business cases where there's significant investments. We are required to provide benefit cost ratios. If we're accessing funding, it's got to, those benefit cost ratios have got to be over 1. You know, that they are a rigorous process we've got to undertake. We'll probably share some of that, I think, probably through the regen panel. They probably get into the BCRs in a bit more detail. There's in terms of assessing where the risk is and the benefit of investing, there's also looking at the scale of exposure, because that's in amongst that's part of that consideration. Benefit versus the opportunities and the benefits the input, the cost of it, and the benefits you're getting out of it. And we strive and will continue to be evidence-led, and we just talked about that engagement process we have, and ensuring that what we're doing is in keeping with what people want us to do, both customers and citizens and elected members. So really think that real complex stakeholder matrix, really. So it's there's not just one thing in terms of arriving at you know, a formulaic approach to risk assessment and saying, right, well, if it's above that threshold, no, we're not going to do it, because actually there are projects, as we know, that where the opportunities are great, but so is the risk that we're taking. So we need to take a sensible, it's called a rational mind, I think, in law. So we need to, the decision makers need to have a rational mind when taking those significant decisions.
Yeah, I suppose the only thing I was just add to what Debbie said, as part of that process is the options appraisal. So looking at what the courses of action we've got in front of us, and then being able to evaluate those and what's most likely to help to get us to where we need to get to in light of the risks. And obviously part of that option is sometimes we have, I think, a standard thing in our business cases and our ODRs around do nothing. So the option of doing nothing is an option, but what does that doesn't actually achieve what you need to achieve. So we try and evaluate the options in the round and then sort of inform the decisions, as Debbie said, based on the evidence.
I suppose I'd say, I'm not trying to shoot the question down, but we don't have a kind of let's accept increased risk mindset. Oh, well, The risk has gone up. Let's just accept that and roll with it. So I think Debbie and Lee have described that kind of, it's managing a business, isn't it, really? You don't just shrug. You have to balance. You think about the consequences of not doing something that has a risk, as well as the consequences of doing something. It's normal. It's very pressurised, but being pressurised doesn't mean just accepting risks willy-nilly.
I was going to come back on the last question because you mentioned risk management, and you'll be cited on the work that we're doing through the audit committee. Now, if you've watched last week's audit committee, you will also know that through those level of engagements, I've tried to shape the audit committee's perspective, because the audit committee has got a particular perspective which is around making sure there's efficacy of the system. We've done 2 deep dives. We've got a number of strategic risks, and in that meeting I was saying that the audit committee's role, because of the terms of reference for the audit committee, is fairly narrow, but it needs to get evidence in order to assure itself that it's discharging that role. Your role is different, but the material, once produced, can be used many times. It's a rich picture that we are producing, so we provided like a portfolio summary by risk that actually sets out what the risk is and the environment people are operating in, and the mitigating actions, the extent to which this council can mitigate against some of those strategic risks. And in this regard, that and the role of this committee, you might be useful, you actually utilising that material and doing what I'm guarding the audit committee against doing, because their job is just about making sure that the arrangements are there. I think the role of you and Scrutiny is about really getting into the subject matter in a bit more detail.
No, agreed that. Any more comments? Because we're going to move on to off-notice questions now. Have any of the OSMC got any off-notice questions they'd like to ask? Any of the OSMC committee themselves? No? So we'll open it now. Yes, Dave?
Yeah, thank you. We mentioned earlier on, or rather you mentioned earlier on, that we're facing this challenging financial environment. So given the council's stated focus on financial resilience, value for money and managing long-term risk, so can you explain how future plans to transition the council's vehicle fleet, to transition these into electric vehicles, represents a prudent use of public funds, particularly in light of, the very realistic sort of prospect that there's going to be significant changes to the national net zero policy?
Yeah, so this mainly relates to our capital programme, and we don't really been looking through the capital budget, and there's some investment in the fleet. So what we do is we work with our fleet manager in terms of what's the requirements of the fleet. We've been doing this for kind of a number of years really, in terms of trying to maximise the use of the fleet and only kind of replacing at, when necessarily looking at the whole life cost of the vehicles. So where we've kind of extended the period when it's replaced now, we can replace every 10 years as well. So just kind of in terms of that replacement schedule, we kind of try and maximise that, as well as just thinking about the EV kind of, not EV kind of relationship. What we've done as well is our strategy isn't just to replace everything with EV. We've kind of looked from a value for money perspective as well. So trying to think, going back a couple of years, we were looking at the street cleansing vehicles, for example, and and we were looking at what the cost of EV would be as compared to kind of replacing like with like almost, and it was just exorbitant. So at that stage, we made the decision not to go EV with those vehicles. With the kind of the pool cars, we've got some fleet in there in terms of, then we are doing EV because it's not kind of that that additional cost. So I know Debbie's itching to get
I
in.
think it's about the technology, and I think that's the sort of where you're coming at with the question, isn't it? It's where the technology has matured, then it's right to make that investment. But there's a long way to go. So hopefully what Faye's already described to you is that we're sweating the assets as much as possible anyway, and then so that we retain. The transport team would love to change it in terms of having a bit of a rule of thumb, but we changed that some years ago because of the financial environment. And in terms of that conversion over to other technology, we're looking on a case-by-case basis. So we had, I think it were about 17 adult social care vehicles that needed replacing. We looked at the market at that point in time, and as Faye said, it was too immature in terms of we would have had to buy bespoke kit to modernise the vehicles. So that's why it was just too complicated. So we scotched the idea at that point in time. That's not to say it's never, but what we're describing is that it's each case, each vehicle is considered for its own merits. And I can see Scott's wanting to come in, and Scott actually manages this section. So
I was just going to make a point. The key thrust of this is trying to maximise the use of the fleet. So we haven't got stock that isn't being utilised, or we have got types of vehicles that can't be utilised. So obviously EV fleet rollout for things can be a bit challenging because you need the appropriate charging infrastructure to do that, and obviously that's a big transition away from diesel. So there is a lot of strategic work taking place around how that might be done, but obviously it has got to represent best value and be right for the organisation as well. So there is as I say, a big strategic piece of work about that rollout. But as Debbie and Faye have said, it's got to be something that operationally is going to be the right thing to do, and also financially be the right thing to do, and that's the key driver behind decisions on fleet management.
Sorry, just to add, we did get an external report on this as well when we were looking at it at the time of looking at the street cleansing and the buses. And also the feedback from the manager at the time was it's not always about cost as well. Like when we were looking at some of these buses, it was like, I need to ensure that these can run, that they can service, all that kind of stuff as well. So we had those conversations.
Yeah, that's right, because when the weather's colder, the batteries don't last as longer. And I know there's been some cities where buses are having to come back every 2 hours because there's not even enough in them. But I think also looking at the bigger picture, and even though it's unlikely to happen, it is possible that if there was a power outage for a couple of days for some reason, that would mean that the majority of those vehicles would be useless, wouldn't it? So I guess it's kind of keeping a balance, really.
Is that okay? Yeah, Dave. Any other? Neil, have you got anything?
Might as well carry on with fleet. The fleet anyway says 262 fully electric and 20 hybrids. Is that purely council? That's not to do with St Ledger?
It does include St Ledger, yeah.
And you say that you review your fleet. Have you actually considered how much fresh air you carry around in your fleet?
Do you just care to explain what you mean fresh air?
Well, you get most trucks seem to be like long wheel-based transits. And when you open back up, all they've got is a pair of ladders. So when I say carrying fresh air, I used to run a fleet of about 300 vans, and we reduced them from being big transit vans to cars or smaller vans. And we had big transit vans as more like a workhorse. So if we needed 1,000 bricks on site, then we put them in a big transit van. But if we needed a man on site with a ladder, then he went in a little one. Yeah. Have you done anything along that line?
I mean, the ordering of fleet is a very carefully managed process around, as Faye's alluded to, the life of vehicles, and also we can't have a position where fleet is breaking down as well. So you've got to manage that. And again, the team who are doing it won't be purchasing things that are just not appropriate for the job. We're just simply not in a position as an organisation to do things like that. So there is a Obviously, a fleet management team who looks into that. And funnily enough, we've got a meeting straight after this one around the fleet utilisation as well. So it is a carefully managed element. So hope that answers your query.
If I can just add to it then, so each vehicle on average does 6,800 miles. That's a lot less than an average car. So when you say about utilisation, I think you're dead right. Utilisation is something that needs to be really considered, and I don't know if it's something that we can do, but maybe working outside of normal, so 8 while 5, can we not do a 11 while 8, or do something where we can utilise these vehicles a lot more? Because it is damning to see vehicles parked up outside of normal working hours.
I mean, obviously, it's where different people are using vehicles as well. You do have to have them parked in a certain place to access. So you know, it's very rare you get fleet actually utilised fully for the working day, simply because operationally it doesn't work. But the team do take this into consideration, and wherever possible that is being managed.
Because moving on, I was interested with St Ledger. I'm looking for St Ledger, and they're obviously not yet. But for what I understand about how St Ledger operate their starting day and finishing day, they're missing opportunities to utilise the guys better, because they seem to focus all their energy in putting guys in one area to work. So say for argument's sake you lived in Hatfield, you'd be expected to work in Mexborough, and all your work would be in Mexborough. So you're effectively travelling from Hatfield to Mexborough in one run, doing no work on way, and then when you get there all your work's concentrated in Mexborough, and then on your return you're returning back to Hatfield with no runs. Is it not something that, I'm saying you, but obviously St Ledger should be more considerate, that could be streamlined a bit so that work starts close to home and finishes close to home?
Well, what you're suggesting there, I'm happy to pick that up with St Ledger around that scenario you've talked about, and just get a response to you around that, people living in Hatfield, working in Mexborough, and how that works out. So yeah, I'll take that by St Ledger.
I was just going to make the point in terms of an earlier part of the discussion that actually you might have noticed in the report that it talks about an approval for that level of resource, but the fact that it needs more consideration, because we're acutely conscious that is within the capital programme. It's a big investment, and that same business case, that same consideration based on the other, we've suggested that that's delegated to the portfolio to go through line by line. That's how we've done it before, and that's how we intend it to be done for the future.
Yeah, just to mention as well, the fleet manager works really closely with the teams in terms of, so he's working closely with St Ledger. And we've had a previous conversation about making sure that we're buying the right size vehicles and that we're not buying too big vehicles. So I know that conversation was taking place between St Ledger and the fleet, and I would, as Debbie said, expect that to happen before then we commit to exactly what is kind of going to be purchased and what's going to be in that officer decision record.
So just adding to that then, I didn't really, like I say, I asked a question about St Ledger and not thinking it was going to be different. In here we've talked about the £55,000 in 2028 for the tax, additional tax for electric and hybrid. Is that not something that St Ledger should take into consideration in theirs budget as well? Will that be something, because I couldn't find it anywhere, that's why I'm asking a question, yeah.
Right, thank you very much. What we'll do is, it's obviously we're getting close to the 3 hour mark, but we've managed to conclude everything. What I'll do now is I'll just remind you what I said earlier on in my opening statement, and then I've just got something to read out to you. Obviously, I've been advised that should it be necessary, I have the option to adjourn today's meeting after the scheduled session and reconvene a further OSMC meeting in order to ensure that all relevant documents receive appropriate scrutiny. Therefore, I would like to move that the committee adjourns today's meeting to continue debate on Monday the 9th of February at 12:30 p.m. in accordance with Council Procedure Rule 17(1). Does the committee agree? Thank you. Therefore, in accordance...
sorry, can I just have a record that I don't agree?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Is that noted, Caroline? Yeah, thank you. Therefore, in accordance with the motion and Council Procedures Rule 17, brackets 1. The meeting is adjourned until Monday the 9th of February at 12:30 p.m. I therefore close this meeting and thank everyone for attending. Thank you very much. Thank you. The